Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of Policy Watch with me, Frank Pereira, on Rajya Sabha television. The Union government, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has a vision for converting all vehicles in India to electric vehicles by 2030. Electric vehicles use alternate fuel electricity instead of petrol or diesel. There is a growing acceptance for hybrid and electric cars in the country, and more manufacturers are entering this niche segment with an express objective of lowering the fuel import bill and running cost of vehicles. Conversion of vehicles to electric vehicles has a potential to save fossil fuels worth about $100 billion annually, which in turn would save the country precious foreign exchange, prevent the dependence on imported petroleum products, and reduce the pollution in cities by 80 to 90%. By the year 2030, the NDA government wants India to be a 100% electric vehicle nation. India spent 4.7 lakh crore rupees in 2016-17 in importing crude oil. Electric vehicles will help lower the bill. The National Electric Mobility Mission plan targets 7 million electric and hybrid vehicles by 2020. This edition of Policy Watch, we will analyze the government's 2030 vision for electric vehicles. Joining me on the program today are R.C. Bhargava, Chairman, Maruti Suzuki India Limited, Tutu Dhawan, auto expert. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of Policy Watch. Mr. Bhargava, I'd like to start with you first, of course. What do you think of this ambitious 2030 vision of the electric vehicles?
Well, I think the vision of moving to electric vehicles is a very appropriate one for our country. There can be no argument with that. But I don't think anybody has really officially articulated that 100% of all vehicles will become electric by 2030. In fact, that's not the proposal which has emanated in the Niti Aayog or anywhere. The best that I have seen and heard, still not official, is that while commercial vehicles will become 100%, the passenger cars, their target which they are presently talking about is a 40% share of the market in the sales in 2030.
Sure. Okay. So how do we achieve this goal, Tutu Dhawan? I mean, towards moving towards being fully electric. And first and foremost, like Mr. Bhargava has pointed out, we're not still sure about whether it's going to be 100% electric or not.
You see, to my mind, I think the main theme is going to be the infrastructure. And once you have the infrastructure in place, only then can you win the confidence of a consumer to be able to buy something electric. Today, you have to give confidence to the owner that he can reach his destination with his family at midnight. He can come back home without the car stalling. So these sort of emergencies have to be looked at first. You have the infrastructure, you have gas stations now. Similarly, you would have charging stations, and of course, you would also have efficient charging system by which in maybe 15 minutes or half an hour, you could probably get about 80% of the charge back to be able to reach your destination. So these sort of things, unless you get that confidence, it may be a long shot, I would say.
Okay, infrastructure going forward is key, is what you're suggesting. Mr. Bhargava, is the industry as a whole ready to take on this challenge?
The industry is ready to take on any technological challenge. But if I may supplement what Mr. Dhawan said, in India, it's not only a question of infrastructure. The affordability of the electric car is a big factor in India. We have to recognize that 75% of the cars sold in India are the small cars. They are cars which are roughly in the 5 lakh price range. Now, when you make an electric car, today an electric car giving a reasonable level of performance, that cost of 5 lakhs will go up to 11 or 12 lakhs. Now, the persons who are buying cars at 5 lakhs, how do they afford a car costing more than double that price? That's going to be a very big challenge, the whole question of affordability.
Sure.
Infrastructure is very much what Mr. Dhawan says.
No, that's a very valid point that you raised about affordability. So how do we tackle that challenge? What needs to be done, do you think?
It's something which nobody has an answer for at the moment. But one approach is that people abroad especially, that is what Tesla has done. They're starting from the upper range of vehicles, the more costly vehicles, and making them electric and selling them electric, because at that level, if a vehicle was costing 20 lakhs and its price went up by another 5 or 6 lakhs, it would not make that much of a difference, especially if there was some government incentives in terms of road tax and excise duties and various other levies. It would make a difference on a small car, because 5-6 lakhs on 5 lakhs is very different from 5-6 lakhs on 20 lakhs.
True, true.
So this is one way of going about it. Hopefully, and we have yet to see whether this will happen or not, there will be some technological breakthroughs which will bring down the cost.
Indeed. And we have to wait for that, and hopefully
But
that
we
will
have to hope that it happens.
And it happens soon.
And it happens soon.
Sure.
Because otherwise, government can't be expected to subsidize millions of cars. Not feasible.
Sure.
Nobody can subsidize, in fact.
Sure.
So unless the costs come down, the affordability will be a challenge which I think could be almost a deal breaker.
Indeed. You know, Mr. Dhawan, it's a very valid point that has been raised by Mr. Bhargava, the affordability of some of these electric vehicles in the near future, and whether the common man can actually, or an aspirational India can actually afford it. But are there some best practices that we can use from somewhere abroad, maybe replicate that model here in India?
I don't think anywhere we have gone 100% electric so far. It's all hybrid and electric that is happening. And some places, of course, the infrastructure they are trying to build up. But as Mr. Bhargav said, yes, affordability is the main question, or main issue, I would say, because as he also said that 75% of the cars are sold between 5 lakhs and 8 lakhs. So if the same car becomes double its amount or close by, it will be very difficult for people to sustain that. So I think there will have to be some sort of relief, maybe from the government side, in terms of taxation, import policies and so on, which could help the manufacturers into looking at making cheaper vehicles. Plus, as time goes by, the new inventions will become cheaper, like in other cases also, in the earlier cases. So that time maybe it might become a little affordable. But to start with, immediately it is not.
Till that time we see a technological breakthrough.
Yes.
Is the hybrid car the way to go, the way ahead then?
That's right.
So is that the option that we have? Stick with the hybrid car for the time being,
At
and
the
maybe
moment,
look at
yes. At the moment, yes.
How viable an option is it really, if you look at the economic conditions and the environment at this point in time?
You see, again, I would say the same thing would be for the hybrid also. The hybrid cost is also almost 1.5 times, if not double in certain cases. So even that may not be too viable in the smaller segment. The main flagship of our India is between 4 lakhs and 8 lakhs, or 4 lakhs and 10 lakhs. So that I don't think they could afford a hybrid in that cost also. So cost is going to be the main issue, unless, of course, they try and increase the transportation or do something that the people will not buy cars and go into public transportation and so on. So having something by itself, I don't think is going to be possible.
Mr. Bhargava, in order to make this vision a success by 2030, do you believe that we need a policy shift as well at some point in time?
The government is still formulate a policy on electric vehicles. I think a lot of discussion is going on, a lot of information is being collected, and on the basis of all what they're able to get, they will come out with a policy. I'm not sure when, but probably in the next few months there will be a policy. And I think that policy will take into account all these considerations of affordability, of the infrastructure, charging. The people who will buy the more expensive cars will also have facilities for charging the cars at home. They'll have houses, garages, driveways where they can plug in the car at night and charge it so that it's fully ready next morning. A lot of people who buy the small cars don't have this facility at home. Again, a very big difference from what happens in most other countries in the world. Not all, but most.
Yes.
Where most people there have homes where they can plug in their cars at night to charge. Then the infrastructure requirement becomes much smaller, because then you need to provide only a limited number of charging stations, so that when the guy is out on the road somewhere and his battery is running down, he can charge it. But it's quite a different thing if a large percentage of all the cars require to be charged every day at a public infrastructure point. The volumes become very different in that case. And I think that's the challenge also we have in India.
Sure, sure. You know,
Point I was trying to make is the Indian situation is actually not comparable to the situation anywhere else.
I'd like to add here with Mr. Bhargava that today almost 80 to 90% of consumers, they park their cars on the roadside.
That's right.
So how do you expect, them to be taking leads from their house and putting it in? So people will be stumbling over that at night and probably have accidents.
sure.
So unless
So the point you are making at the beginning of the program about infrastructure remains the moot issue, and that needs to be developed first if you have to make this particular vision
But
a
let
success.
me also inform you that there have been technologically systems which have come which are known as flash charging. So you could have a zebra crossing on a road which has got all the energy, and the minute you go over it or you go and stand on a red light for that moment, you get your charge back again. And of course, by braking also you regenerate electricity. So these are technologies that are going to be fine-tuned. As I said earlier, fine-tuning is the main issue where finally you will get your costing right. So at the moment, it is all plug-in.
You know the kind of technology that you're talking about seems very futuristic and sees...
Indeed, even what you're talking about, I'm talking about 40, 50 years
Sure,
back, we used
sure.
to imagine that we will be looking at each other and talking on the phone. So here we are. So
no.
that was just a fantasy that time.
So are you suggesting that it is possible? I mean, all this is possible
Indeed.
in the present scenario in India?
Well, India, the government also has to take some steps toward it to bring in this technology into India, but this is available.
Okay. Mr. Bhargava, I saw Mr. Bhargava, shaking his head in disagreement when we were talking about this kind of technology and the futuristic technology as such. Yes, Mr. Bhargava, you had something.
No, I was just going to say this technology is like a lab technology. It's still not in practical use anywhere. And as Mr. Dhawan said earlier, I think China is the one who has progressed most with electric cars. And there the penetration of electric cars is just 4-5% or something like that. So there's a long way to go for us. And one other big difference which I forgot to mention is that unlike all the other countries, we have a growing car population in India. We are growing 8-10% a year. All the countries in the West and in Japan and now China have more or less stabilized their annual car production. It's not increasing.
It's not increasing, yeah.
So it's become an even more difficult challenge for us, because today we are producing 3 million cars. By 2030, we may be producing 9 or 10 million cars a year. So not only do you have to look at electrification of the 3 million which we produce today, but you have to look at the electrification of the 6 million or 7 million a year extra which will be produced. And then between now and 2030, the number of IC engine, the internal combustion engine cars produced will be far, far more than the electric cars. So what about the pollution from those cars? That's where what you're talking about hybrid comes into play. That you have to have both electric cars being pushed to the extent that the customer willing to buy, the infrastructure is willing to support. And along with electric cars, also push hybrid cars, so that in totality, you get a reduction in the import of fossil fuels and all of that kind of thing.
Sure. Talking about the customer, talking about the consumer, is the consumer ready for this? I mean, are the consumers willing to go completely electric? I mean, is there anything that suggests that people want to change from the ICE model to the electric model?
At the moment, the customer doesn't know enough to take a decision, but he knows that today he doesn't have charging at home. He knows there's no infrastructure. So how can he think of an electric?
Sure, sure.
We've had the Reva in the market for a long time, but it sells negligible numbers.
Indeed. Mr. Dhawan, how do we change the mindset then? What needs to be done to send out a message to the masses?
Look here, masses can only learn with confidence. If you have confidence in buying something, at the end of the day, not everybody is a automobile aficionado who's be going and choosing a Ferrari or a Lamborghini and things like that. They want a basic transport system to go to office and back and do their recreation and so on. So if you can provide that sort of a transport, I'm sure people will take over very easily. But here again, I'd like to add another thing, what Mr. Bhargava was saying, that by 2030, the amount of cars that are going to be produced, say even if you produce 6 million electric vehicles, where are you going to get power from? As it is, you have power shortage in India. So unless you start developing your sources of energy, I don't see, this thing to see the light of day.
So should our model then shift from, cars to encouraging public transportation and so on and so forth, bring about a holistic change in the way we commute as such?
That's it. We've always been short-fused on getting transport for ourselves. So why do we buy a car? Why do we buy a motorcycle? It's only because people don't have confidence in the transport system. And so they want to be independent and they want to, reach back home in time. So unless that sort of a confidence comes into our citizens, I don't think, you will be able to have very many buyers for these cars.
Sure, indeed. Taking the discussion forward, Mr. Bhargava, what kind of economic implications is this vision really going to have? Because the import bill is rising on a daily basis. If you look at the oil prices, they are increasing as well. So if we can invest that kind of infrastructure, is it going to help us in the long run?
No, in the long run, as I started by saying, we need to get away from this huge dependence on imported fossil fuel. I don't think anybody is going to argue against that. But the practical way of doing it and how you progress is something which needs to be worked out. And I think there's a whole lot of things which need to be done, including technological advances, including reallocation of priorities and allocations in government budgets, state government budgets, because taking off from where Mr. Dhawan left off, not only do you need more electricity, you need to improve the distribution system. Because if you're going to double the electricity or triple the electricity by that time, as it is today, the distribution system in most states and most small, leave out Delhi, is very weak. Power keeps going off, there are trippings and all kinds of things. Now, where will these distribution systems carry this extra load? You need to have a very big investment in that. Electricity boards are not particularly well off to make investments. They haven't made investments in putting a proper distribution system even now. So where will that money come from them in the next 10, 15 years for them to strengthen the distribution system? That's another aspect which will have to be considered. The electricity board's capability of providing the last mile connectivity to the charging stations.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, of course, there are several things that need to be worked out and put in place before we actually go fully electric. And both our panelists here have pointed out all those reasons. But, Mr. Dhawan, this particular debate about, going electric, hybrid vehicles has been going on for a long time because of environmental concerns as well. Environmentalists have time and again said that we need to move away from fossil fuels and get to renewable energy as far as our mode of communication is concerned, or mode of transportation, I beg your pardon, is concerned. So, but how much of a pressure is there from the powerful oil lobby to ensure that, these technological advancements are stopped?
Well, they have always had a very strong lobby. If you would recollect, in mid-90s, Toyota had come out with an all-electric vehicle in America. There were a couple of thousand of them which were sold on a lease, mind it. They were not sold in ownership. And after the lease expired, maybe 2 or 3 years later, all those cars were taken back and crushed. So obviously, this says that the oil lobby was strong and they didn't want these things to come up. And in fact, if this has been delayed for the last 30 or 40 years, It is purely because of the oil lobby. And now, even today, they are worried about, once it becomes electric, how the Middle East is going to survive. But one more thing I would like to add here, while we are trying to go electric, we have also to start working on employment of the people who are working in factories. Today, a car takes almost 5,000 individual parts to get together and you can run it. With the electric, there would be only about 1,000, 1,200 parts that will be required. What about those ancillaries and people who are working for those manufacturers? What is going to happen to them? So we have to start thinking, when we are trying to shift to electric totally or 100%, we have to start thinking of employing those people who are going to be jobless. Otherwise, there will be arson on the road.
Sure. Okay, time now to get closing comments from both my guests, starting with you, Mr. Bhargava. What's the way ahead then to ensure that this vision is a success?
I think we have to be very clear that our object is to reduce the oil import and to reduce pollution. And for that, we have to use every possible technology which we can possibly do economically and which will be acceptable to the consumer. Because we must always remember, as we've been saying, unless the consumer accepts it, we can't push him to do it. So the way forward is to keep working at this, trying to solve the problems as they come up. I don't think 100% conversion to electric is going to happen in the next 10, 15 years. I think it's going to take much longer than that. But that's not the real issue. The intention to work towards that end with all our capabilities, technological, financial, and resource management resources is what we need to do.
We need to put our best foot forward.
Absolutely.
Mr. Dhawan, close the show for us with your concluding remark.
Well, I hope our dreams come true and the general public does accept electric soon and it is affordable as well.
Well, that's it on this edition of Policy Watch. I'd like to thank both my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. As always, we'd like to have your feedback on the program. Do share your feedback with us on the email ID flashing at the bottom of the screen. That's it from me. See you again next time.